Welcome back. Thanks for joining us tonight. If we haven't met yet, I'm Neil Chase. I'm the CEO at CalMatters. We are the nonprofit news organization that covers California. And it's a real thrill tonight to have you here in Sacramento and with us virtually statewide for the first CalMatters Ideas Festival. We are very excited tonight to partner with our good friends at Zócalo Public Square. For this opening night session, they share our passion for journalism, our passion for live journalism. We're going to do this on stage, in front of people, so we can directly engage people in California in this room and virtually on the live stream in these super important conversations. It's a real pleasure now for me to turn this over to my friend, the fabulous Executive Director of Zócalo Public Square, Moira Shourie.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Moira Shourie, and I'm the Executive Director of Zócalo Public Square. Thank you to everyone joining us online as well as here in person at the first ever California Ideas Festival. At Zócalo, our mission is to connect people to ideas and to each other. Everything we do is free, and everyone is welcome. We publish original writing and present conversations just like this one. You can find us at zocalopublicsquare.org, on podcast platforms, and on YouTube. So please subscribe for our latest programs. We were founded in 2003, and now we are celebrating our 20th birthday year. We're excited to co-present tonight's program with CalMatters, and we're going to ask the question, what makes a great California idea? I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Joe Matthews. Joe is the California columnist and democracy editor at Zócalo Public Square. He was previously an Irvine Senior Fellow at New America and a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, the Baltimore Sun, and the Los Angeles Times. He is the author of books about Governor Schwarzenegger and about California's governance and constitutional failures. He is the co-founder and co-president of the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy, the world's leading network of scholars and practitioners of participatory democracy. His new project, now this is exciting, is called Democracy Local, a planetary platform focused on how everyday people govern themselves. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Moira. Thank you. Again, I'm Joe Matthews. It's great to be at the very first CalMatters Festival. We can always say we were here as this grows into another great California event. It's a California idea in itself. The title of this is What Makes a Great California Idea. Ideas usually come from thinking. And the 20th century environmentalist and anarchist writer Edward Abbey famously said that there are three categories of thinking. One, there is science, logic, reason. That was category one. Category two, there is thought verified by experience. And category three was, in his words, then there is California. In that formulation, Abbey, you spent a lot of time in Arizona. I don't think he liked us much. It's a reminder that California idea can be good and bad, can be earth-shatteringly great, like early warning on earthquakes, or apocalyptically dangerous. It's worth reminding for all the attention in New Mexico, Oppenheimer did most of his work and research at Berkeley and Caltech. Anyway, with that introduction, let's meet our guests for tonight's Zócalo. Starting on my left, Anousheh Ansari is CEO of XPRIZE, the world's leader in designing and operating incentive competitions to solve humanity's grand challenges. The first female private space explorer, the first Muslim woman in space. She's a global presence in future positive tech markets and a voice for women within STEM and entrepreneurial industries. Ansari and her family sponsored XPRIZE's first venture in 1994, the $10 million Ansari XPRIZE that ignited a new era for commercial space flight. To date, XPRIZE has launched 30 prizes offering more than $500 million and hosting over 35,000 innovators in its competitions. To the left, a familiar figure for many here is Tani Cantil-Sakauye, who's president and CEO of the Public Policy Institute of California. She holds the Walter and Esther Hewlett Chair in Understanding California's Future. From 2011 to 2022, she was the 28th Chief Justice of California and chaired the Judicial Council, the constitutional policy and rulemaking body of the judicial branch. She was the first person of color, the second woman to do so. And she's a local. She's a Sacramento native, alumnus of McClatchy High, Sacramento City College, and you went all the way to UC Davis after that. Ian Klaus is the founding director of Carnegie, California, which was started last year. It's the California arm office of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and an organization run by Tani's former Supreme Court colleague, Tino Cuellar. It must be, the think tank's so much more exciting than the court, I guess. That's what that means.
A little bit.
Yeah. He is a leading scholar in the nexus of urbanization, geopolitics, and global challenges, experienced practitioner of subnational diplomacy, and the author of The Belt and Road City, another book of Forging Capitalism, and then Elvis is Titanic, Classroom Tales from the Other Iraq. Thank you for joining us. I'm supposed to remind the audience now that we'll be taking questions towards the end of the program. And if you're watching online, you can submit questions to the live chat on YouTube. I want to start with Anousheh and ask about the XPRIZE, which itself is a California idea. So, you know, it's an idea about finding great ideas. What's the inspiration of the XPRIZE? How did it start? Whose brain did it pop into?
So I like you had the three categories.
Yeah.
And I think XPRIZE exemplifies, sort of when you crash those three categories into one, because it's based on science and facts, comes with experience, but it involves a lot of imagination. So what we like to say is we set a bar high at audacious but achievable. And the first audacious idea that we had, which launched the competition, was to, inspired by how Charles Lindbergh flew from New York to Paris to win a competition and change the whole aviation industry, what if we could do the same thing for space? What if we could create a whole industry that will change the way we access space? And the idea was to ask the world to go build a spaceship in their garage and go to edge of space, 100 kilometers, demonstrate they can do it twice within 2 weeks, and then win $10 million. So it was very simple, very clear, but very audacious. Especially back then, there was no SpaceX. Nobody talked about space. Investing in space was completely crazy, and regulation actually didn't allow for commercial companies to launch to space unless it was contracted by government. So it took 10 years for the prize to be won, but it shifted the mindset. It reduced the cost of access to space exponentially from $25,000 back then to, in a few years, to be about $250 per kilogram. And that's a game changer in what industries can exist in space now.
So you've had so many different XPRIZes, the pandemic-oriented ones. When you see a lot of submissions, you see, it's tens of thousands of innovators, so many ideas. Do the California ones stick out? Or in this era, do they come from California? Or are they sort of global collaboratives, like the folks who, created the COVID vaccine? I mean, is there a California nature? Can you spot a California idea? Does it walk up and quack differently than the other ideas?
Well, the winner of the first competition was from California. It was Mojave Air and Space, amazing aviation engineer who designed Spaceship One. So it was California sort of set the stage for the first winning, and a lot of now space-based companies are here in California. But I have to say, we have made an effort to make sure we democratize innovation and reach out to the furthest corners of the world to get innovators. So we have innovators from 174 countries, and we always have participants from California. Half of our teams come from the US. California, Silicon Valley being sort of at the heart of a lot of innovation, so naturally we get a lot of them. But
I think we have a fair share of winners from other states and outside of U.S.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Tani next. And you're PPIC, you're 30 years old, leading think tank of our state. No offense to Carnegie or my colleagues at the Berggruen Institute in Los Angeles, where I'm a fellow. But what is it that you do? I mean, what does PPIC do? Are you supposed to produce ideas, inspire ideas, refine ideas, keep the crazier ideas from going off the road and ruining the state? What is PPIC's relationship to ideas?
Yes, all of the above. We are an institute that is 30 years old. We are a research think tank, but I call us a research think tank plus, because in addition to our experts, our fellows, our PhDs, and our research associates, we do a lot of outreach. We do a lot of public events. We do a lot of convening of diverse voices. We like a good civil rumble in a safe space to find out what are the issues, where do you stand, why do you feel that, what should our researchers look at. We consider that with our research, we head off bad ideas, like with our Water Policy Center, when some regulations came up, we quickly weighed in that the cost of conservation would be incredibly costly. We also produce great ideas when we go into higher education. We created a model for determining that 5 years from now, California will need approximately 1 million more people with college degrees in order to meet our growing economy. And so our numbers helped inform the UC and CSU numbers and goals for people with college degrees. And we've also done a lot with K-12 public funding and the tools that model that to be transparent, because we know the value of education in California. And California is a premier state for education. We ensure that it reaches everyone, that everyone has access across the board, rural, inland, coastal as well. And so we produce ideas based on research and data. It's peer reviewed. We take it on the road. We do a lot of videos. We do a lot of events here. We do a lot of events in San Francisco, because we hear from diverse voices, and then our PhDs get to work. And then we have an entire professional team that puts product out.
Okay. So a follow-up question to this. I mean, I almost want to do my Newsom impression here. It's the fourth largest economy. We just passed Germany. America's coming attraction. Da da da. I can't quite do it. It needs work.
Pretty good.
But there's several Californias out there. Our regions have the size, some ways the character of states. Their economies are very different. Does the meaning of what a California idea is, particularly in kind of the economic realm, the regional economy realm, is that sort of different where you are? And do you find yourself sort of differentiating? There's a different California idea for the San Joaquin Valley than for the North State than for, what we're now calling the Lithium Valley east of San Diego?
Most definitely. We recognize California is really diverse in regions. We recognize urban, we recognize rural, inland, we recognize coastal. And there are different regions, and they're all different Californians. I mean, we tell ourselves California is swimming and sinking and treading water, and the answer is yes. Ian and I were on a panel together, an event that talked about rural and inland California and how different that is and the needs. So at PPIC, we are statewide, including with our survey. So we take into account the different regions. Our survey disaggregates our numbers so that legislators can know what's happening in their district. And the same is true for when we talk about CSU and UC, and community colleges, who is it reaching? And we just launched an economic policy center to talk about labor and workforce and all the different stratifications in California and the education needed to get there.
Thanks. I'm going to want to go to Ian now. Einstein said, if at first the idea is not absurd, then there is no hope for it. I was like that. And, it's an absurd place we're in. We have our absurdities. Maybe that's, we produced a lot of ideas in this state, some great ones for the world. We gave them Hollywood, Silicon Valley, obvious, the jacuzzi, the martini and the Mai Tai, okay? Korean barbecue taco, Dreyer's ice cream and Baskin Robbins, that's Oakland and Glendale, by the way, fantasy football and the West Coast offense, okay? The squeegee, all right? Scientology and modern Pentecostalism, and the right to access the entire coast, at least where the sand is wet. So, but your job is about connecting California and the rest of the world, and you know, this international think tank and such, and you know, we've got all these ideas. We keep giving them so much, and now, you know, the rest of the country, what are they doing? They're banning us. You know, they don't want to teach ethnic studies. That's a California invention. Intersectionality, you know, a book about that might get you on the list. That's an invention out of, you know, when Kimberly Crenshaw was at UCLA. So, you know, do they not love our ideas anymore? Do they not appreciate us anymore? What is going on?
Look, later tonight, for people who are sticking around, there's going to be a game where we go around the room very, very quickly, and you have to say California idea, and you can't come up with one, you're out. And Joe's going to moderate, and he can referee, too. It's great to be on stage with you guys. If you're wondering how much I admire everyone's work here, I brought a notebook on stage, even though I'm a part of the panel. So it's interesting. I run the California Center for what is the oldest think tank in America, one of the youngest think tanks in California, that is dedicated to international peace. And that sounds sort of silly, but in some ways, although that isn't a California idea, it feels like it's one that continues to resonate in California. And when Tino, my boss and colleague, and Tani's former colleague, is asked what we do, he sometimes says, you know, we try to bend the arc of history with ideas, which is playing off lots of different things. And then you can take it down to various parts, which is, you know, teachers and professors bend the arc of history with ideas as they are expressed to students and shared with students and as they nurture and seed new ideas. We do it through research and the exchange of ideas with policymakers, with industry, with stakeholders in all parts of California, but also all parts of the world. And the interesting thing about California as a place for ideas and great ideas is how does it conceive of its place in the world as an agent for collaboration, for friendship, for competition, ultimately for something like international peace or assessing global challenges like climate change. And we're here in part because we think California has different ideas for doing so, can represent itself differently, and we can perhaps get to that in conversation. But this question of our relationship with the rest of the United States is to me a really fascinating one, because you sort of did this fourth largest economy, fifth largest economy. We like to actually speak of ourselves as Californians, I'm native to California, as a place that is apart. And I think that categorization, we're the fourth, it's actually the fifth largest economy in the world. But if you look at polling or surveying that we've done about how Californians think about our role in global affairs, it actually doesn't track that differently from the rest of the United States. Now, there are some important differentiations that we could talk about, including how much we value human rights as an example, or action around climate change. But when it comes to global connections, we are much more like the rest of the United States than you'd think we are.
Let me ask you to go there a little bit more. I mean, I'm here in part because of California's leadership in the making of weapons of war, right? My mother's family were Dust Bowl Okies, who were fortunate enough to end up, at North American Aviation in Rockwell, making planes and weapons, right? And they got their education that way, and other part of the families from the Navy. So how does it, I mean, you mentioned, we're maybe a little more open to diplomacy or human rights. What's the case for California, or is there a different California idea of peace? What's the case for California as a force for international peace?
Tani and I were talking earlier about what's going to happen on stage, and one of the things I did not prepare for was the question, is there a different California definition of peace? There seems to be thoughts that Californians have, at least so far as we've surveyed them, as it comes to how diplomacy and foreign affairs should occur. And one of the things that you're not seeing in this state, and we have another survey in the field right now, but that we haven't seen thus far, is an inclination to close borders or to close diplomatic practices or discussion and dialogue abroad. And so 2-to-1 Californians in all regions and across races, education level, income level, believe that what happens abroad affects their well-being. And with that comes a support for diplomatic engagement and engagement in development. Now, you can find other parts of this country where you won't have those numbers, where you have some, the echoes of America First and a new version of that, but it doesn't seem to be very resonant in California.
Interesting. So to get at refine even more the question of what makes a great California idea, and think about the kind of place we are. I mean, a lot of the inventions I read off were invented, they were ideas taken or borrowed from other parts of the world, or they were brought here, or people who moved here, immigrants, were behind them. Is there something sort of, that kind of integrative in terms of California in the world? I mean, you look at the iPhone, which famously doesn't have a technology, I don't think, that was created in California, but is the integration and design of a bunch of technologies from a bunch of different places. Is that the California, the better part of the California idea essence?
I would say what's unique, I think, in California in general is, and it's an essential part of entrepreneurship, is this notion that failure is not a bad thing. It's not something that people are afraid. So experimentation happens, and that's where you have innovation. So I think in many countries and also many states, people are not that open and sometimes even proud of their failures and the lessons learned through those failures. And I think that's why you get some unique, extraordinary ideas coming from California, specifically areas where technology is at play, and you get these big innovations that are world-changing because you're permitted to really go out there and really do crazy ideas.
Yeah, well, I love that. And for a Sacramento audience, that means when your bill gets thrown into the suspense file, it's not dead, it's a failure, but it's going to lead somewhere. You should celebrate it.
With the new governor, everything is new again. I will say, too, building upon that sort of intrepidity of California, is that stating the obvious. We are one of the most diverse states. And we're diverse because people come here for the California dream, I believe, or the American dream, like many of our ancestors did. And because we're leaving behind something that we're here because we have nothing left to lose at this point. And California has a lot of opportunity that can be, I think, energized and individualized with agency for people. So I think about California and not only no fear of failure, but also no fear of speaking up and trying ideas and not being so self-conscious about being out there and being who you can be in a place of California where there's so much acceptance because it's so diverse.
I agree entirely. What does it mean to be connected to the world, which Californians think that they are and should be, and yet not have an institution that is charged in the sense that the State Department or that the national government is charged with conducting that work? It means that the movement of ideas and the movement of people and the movement of goods is something that we're all engaged in quite a sort of a leadership kind of way, and I think that leads to a comfort. A comfort with sort of being wrong, with things that are different, with having to be on the edge and in conversation in ways that doesn't necessarily feel like you are, to put it politely, in other parts of the United States where other people are in charge of global connections.
Excellent. Well, I write a lot of columns that are wrong, so maybe that's why I found an audience here. So one thing I wonder about California ideas, I think a lot of the ones that end up in public policy, and maybe this isn't spoken about, we do have one expert in urban such here, but the 2020 census says that California has both the highest urban population density and the highest urbanization share of total population among the 50 states. We are an urban place. We don't think of ourselves as this. Does a lot of our thinking, do a lot of our policies actually, without us saying that, are really about the fact that we are in very urban places? I mean, even our smaller places can be, quite dense in their population. I mean, are we, it's urban living, it's, you think of, things we've done in criminal justice, things we've done in immigration, is that a through line for us?
Or XPRIZE and the work you're doing on wildfires. And I think this is a classic example of sort of innovation meeting with this rural-urban issue.
I mean, we look at, I mean, I don't know if being urban has shaped what we do, but we can see problems, different problems in society right in our own backyard. So homelessness is an area where we're looking into how can we really make a difference. And it's a problem that you see in different parts of the world, but again, in California, you see that right in our backyard, or wildfire. So when you experience these things so close and personal, it helps you focus and be able to put the attention you need on solving those problems. So in that aspect, I think it does affect us. I don't like the traffic about it, though. The density doesn't help the traffic.
I'm going to join in on that to say, you know, California is a state where we recognize that there are multiple Californias, and we show a lot of deficit, unfortunately, in rural parts of California, like lack of community colleges, lack of digital access, lack of mortgage-paying jobs in rural areas. And to hear legislative leaders speak about this, the view is that sometimes we forget that a lot of the rural areas of California produce a lot of our energy and all of our ag. And then when policy is made in the capital, sometimes those voices are not as strong or heard as a result of this more urban population that is driving a lot of policy. So there is an unevenness in California, but a recognition of trying to overcome that.
I'm a historian by training, and my urban expertise is actually in how cities interact with other cities around the world, or economies around the world, or other nations. And that's what I did as a diplomat and do now as a scholar. And so I think about how California cities do or don't do that. But one of the things I'm struck by is people in foreign policy world talk a lot about American exceptionalism and its value as a narrative, but its risks as a policy frame. And California is pretty exceptional in lots of ways, including that point on its urbanization patterns. Most of history has, the organization of the political state has been an empire. And in most of history, according to Patrick Joyce, a historian, people have lived in some akin to a peasant state. And we exist as the biggest state in a nation state with a highly urban population. Like in the spectrum of history and political order, we're very unique. And then when you talk about our urban patterns, we're actually not like mega cities, which you're seeing elsewhere in the world, but we have like secondary and tertiary cities too, right? But to the initial point, I wonder how many in the room would have sort of, that would have resonated with, and that we think of ourselves as one of the great urbanization experiments within a nation state experiment in human history.
We've said a lot of pleasant things. There is this idea, particularly with regards to technology, that we are going to end humanity with our ideas. That's the part of the conversation about AI. You know, our friends on the peninsula with their social media and their tech are disrupting lives. There's conversation right now about regulation of social media, and you know, is there something? You know, one of the gold rush at some level, right? Is this signature thing that creates the modern state? Some say the modern America, right? Before the gold rush, it's just pretty dull, you know, Puritan place, and then these guys come into it in this, you know, rush, and America becomes about getting rich as fast as you can, right? And moving fast. Move fast and break things. Is there something irresponsible about us? Do we have a special tendency to go too far and being willing to accept failure, willing to do things that will hurt the world and hurt other people?
Well, as an organization that is deeply rooted on the fact that innovation can also save us from all the problems we have in the world, I think it comes down to whether we choose to be responsible about how we innovate. And I have to say, I listened to the previous panel also, at some point in time, our regulators fell behind how fast technology is moving. So they've been playing catch up. I come from the world, I started my career in telecom, highly regulated industry. So we were innovating, but there were guardrails. There were privacy issues we had to respect. There were tariffs that we had to respect. So we would innovate, but there were guardrails protecting the public. And somehow when we went into the world of internet, those guardrails did not translate, and we never created that protection for the well-being of the public, and that's what we're paying for right now. So at some point in time, I'm hoping that we'll catch up, the regulators will catch up, and we'll be able to create a sandbox where we can still innovate, but then make sure that there is protection. And then basically people's feet would be held to the fire if they don't, play in that sandbox nicely.
I want to say to your question, Joe, compared to whom? Because, California, we can look at ourselves in a vacuum, but just taking the AI question, there are other countries, Ian can speak to those probably better than I can, that don't have the guardrails, that are going to advance, they will have that information, and will the United States or California be behind? Most likely we will be, and it's a good reason, perhaps, but I will say too that the guardrail, for me, is litigation. And we are, California, not shy about litigation. We'll bring those intellectual property, we'll bring those regulatory actions, and I think that that's healthy in terms of, because I worry that our policymakers, our courts will never catch up with technology. And I can attest to when courts had computers and didn't know what to do with them and put them in corners because they just didn't want to plug it in and try to figure it out. So I think that we have to expect the world is on the move. We have to be competitive. We need the guardrails, and litigation provides some of those guardrails.
And in the experimentation, the laboratory that is our federal system, some of the most innovative regulation or legislation around AI that we're seeing is with regards to liability. And so I totally agree. I mean, just to play a little bit, Joe, because we haven't known each other that long, but I feel like part of what we're supposed to do here is be provocative and have fun.
Yes.
Should some of our ideas be regulated more? Should there be regulation of California ideas because we have particularly dangerous ones? I would say from my experience in life, and I'm sure lots of people share this, if I go to London or New York or Paris or Sydney or Buenos Aires, my ideas are regulated in the sense that they tend to fall outside the box in many ways. And that's true for Washington, D.C. in my experience there as well. I mentioned that sort of spectrum of some people call it an Overton window, but comfort with failure, in part because if you actually look around the world or have conversations with subnational leaders, say in sub-Saharan Africa, about how they feel about AI, their focus is much more on how they can use it to create jobs and deliver services better. The fear quotient is balanced by a sort of optimism and benefits quotient. And one of the things that's exciting in the United States for me is that you can have this spectrum of people who are sort of looking at benefits without proper regard for risks, but then lots of other people who are thinking of risks and coming with various systems from regulation to liability regimes to sort of try to rein that in. And we do that dance as a nation. We don't do it just as a subnational jurisdiction. And it's a mini version of what you see around surveying around AI globally, but we get to have it within our domestic frame.
But are we? There's something about our self-conception is apocalyptic, right? I mean, we live in this place with the earthquakes, the terrible and worst thing, wildfires, the mudslides, those all sorts of things. I mean, there's this, I don't know, I think my mother is an apocalyptic person. She's always teaching me about, what to do when the earthquake happened. That it was all going to end soon. And, and we have a whole industry that one of its favorite, storytelling industry, one of its favorite things is the end of the world, right? It's a genre. There's the apocalyptic, there's the post-apocalyptic. Is there something about that knife's edge that we sort of exist in that, that gives, that inspires thinking? Does that inspire ideas? Are the XPRIZE ideas apocalyptic? And when you see a lot of them, I mean, do they respond to an apocalypse? Is there something about us that takes us to great but also terrible places?
I think when you live in that type of world where you're always on the edge of destruction, that means you take risk. So I think this is what is great about it. When you know these problems, again, when you live and you can see wildfires approaching your house and it's going to happen, and you can't even insure your property anymore here about, when it comes to wildfire and other things. These things are, some maybe even inevitable. And then you're like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to take chance. I'm going to take risks. So even living here, it's a risky business. So I think it opens you up to trying new things. And we do look at doomsday in a lot of areas. That's how we find the problems. But instead of focusing on the problems and getting depressed about it, we tend to shift and look at, okay, how can we solve it? What does solving it mean? Let's create a vision of a problem that is solved and put those criteria out there and then tell the world, hey, let's build something that can solve these problems. And I believe a lot of our competitions in the next 5 to 10 years, some of these big issues, climate, global warming, wildfires, water desalination issues, these competitions will definitely put scalable solutions out there, and you will have actually solutions that you can point to and say, we can fix this.
I have 3 words when you brought up that. Y2K. Did you have a backpack? Right? I mean, in government, essential workers, there were 24-hour ban or people posts, Y2K, you had your backpack, you had your hard hat, you moved all your money out of the bank and into some kind of mutual, we took these crazy, I want to say, preparation and because of the unknown, but I think it goes to your point. We prepare for it. We know we're mortal, we prepare for it, and I think we do the best we can under the circumstances.
Y2K, just you can bring it up in almost any conversation, and it's an exciting intervention. I wonder, and this is a sentiment thing, it'd be fun if we had little clickers in the room. One of the things that I experienced when I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, and also moved working on issues from a California perspective as opposed to, say, the IPC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which I've done a lot of work with, is a sense, and I could be totally wrong about this, and it's why it would be great to test it, of fatigue and it being late on lots of issues. And action is urgent, but there's also this not doomsday narrative, but oh, well, humans have been around a long time, we've done a lot of damage, and there's only so much we can do to address it. Or American democracy is near its sort of point of collapse. And this is true in a fair number of parts of the world. And when I come out here, I'm actually quite struck by the sense of it being early on many issues. And that's an AI point, this sort of energy that is around that and some of the optimism and concern around it. So there's a sense for the impacts for what can be developed here. But I also often feel like there's this conversation, and this is a problem of first principles, but also the quality of first principles. Oh, well, let's start to have a really radical conversation right now about the things that are going to change the way the world looks for 50 to 100 years. And we have space for that, as opposed to being overwhelmed by these massive buildings that have existed for centuries and that remind us of the mistakes we made and the things we can't undo and all of the weight that we carry.
We've got to go to audience questions shortly. We're excited for that. And but I wanted to ask a question, open-ended question. I'm a journalist, so I steal thoughts from other people and ask them questions. And I kind of wonder where you look for thinking. I mean, I'm always struck that particularly in this time where things get narrow, things get segregated, there's not a Josiah Royce anymore, right? For those who don't know the name, that's the Royce of Royce Hall, where you see the encampments on when they do stories about UCLA protests. But he was born up the road in Grass Valley in a mining camp in 1855, raised in San Francisco, educated in Berkeley, one of the first graduates. And he was like this totally crazy scholar. He was a scholar of Sanskrit. He wrote on Buddhism. He had ideas about the scientific method, religion, psychology. He ended up being the president of the American Psychological Association. He had invented concepts in insurance, thoughts about race relations that actually sound fairly modern, social ethics, and then laid important foundations of logic, mathematics, cybernetics. I mean, he gets crazy. Do we have any thinkers of that breadth anymore? That's my first question. But more importantly, I mean, who are the people you steal from? I mean, are there thinkers in California that you go to, that you read, that you sneak things from? I'll start. Because I have a good answer to this question. The thinker I steal most from is the city manager of Watsonville, who used to be the city manager of a little town called Gonzales, who's weirdly broad and thinking about anything that involves a locality or governance in small towns. And he grew up in an even smaller place in Yokern, in the western Mojave. His name is Rene Mendez. But anyway, I mean, do you have is there a big, broad thinker out there? And if not, who are you stealing from in the meantime?
Well, I'll start by saying I can't say that I steal from specific people, but I do love people who have different opinions and who explain why they have that opinion. So when I was on the California Supreme Court, I sit around with 6 brilliant people. We don't agree, but I respect them, so I listen to what they have to say. And they grow me in ways that make me actually go and do some homework to see where they're coming from, and I grab a piece of that. And I say that too with, that's why I really love a convening of conflict, because I grow when I hear someone else explain why they disagree. And so I look for contrarians in what I read and in work that I can have a conversation with them.
I steal from Starship Enterprise captains usually. I look at futurists and how they can really look at the future through a different lens with an optimism, so that's where I get my ideas or inspirations.
Shakespeare. No, I have a terrible answer. Self-important. I once sat behind a lady on Amtrak, and she had like 10 magazines, and she was just flipping through them, tearing out ideas. And then she would throw the magazine away. And I'll confess to having an approach at something like that. I often go to newsstands and pick up journals and magazines that are from all different political perspectives or different approaches, and try to find interesting voices to problems that I'm working on, and then platform them. I love that mayors, as an example, in my work, steal from each other. They lend to each other. In fact, it's encouraged. But one of the advantages of being at a think tank is getting to celebrate great thinkers and ideas and try to bring them into conversations that they might not have been part of before. So it's more a sense of understanding the great ideas that are out there and then bringing them up into the surface a little bit.
Well, we want to hear your ideas and your questions about ideas. And so we have people going around with microphones.
No, the microphones are right here, up top. Whoever wants to ask a question, please come up to me. And we're going to start with some questions from the YouTube live chat. Ian Klaus mentions optimism. Joe Matthews, apocalypse. Which is the bigger driver? And what is the balance? And is the balance different among young people in California?
Well, the polling doesn't show a lot of optimism amongst younger people. I coach a youth baseball team called the Hot Potatoes. They had a great season. And the Hot Potatoes are, there's some climate anxiety in the Hot Potatoes, who are only 11, actually, that I find a little disturbing. And I actually try to argue with a few of them about that. There's a lot of things getting better in the world. A lot of things are better. People living longer, higher levels of education as I travel around the world doing Democracy Local. Anyone else want to take that?
I'm going to join in and say that PPIC has done surveys with young people, and we've also looked at how they vote, and they're not engaged. In fact, we have numbers that show the age 18 to 24, a high percentage, are neither in college nor at work. And we wonder where that generation is gone. They've just disappeared. And I'm also just anecdotally realizing that people tell me that of the apathy of young people who feel disconnected from what's happening and from government, and they feel no agency over their lives. And so, we're starting a civics engagement piece because we think we need to show how it is accessible and it depends on you. And so we want to provide that to young people. But I think that optimism is on the low side for younger generations.
It's a false divide. Joe and I are the same person. I mean that only half as a joke. I think one of the qualities of Californians, actually, when you survey them, in particular, is that they can hold multiple ideas in their head at the same time that can be in conflict with each other. And so if you look at AI, again, surveying, there is real fear about its economic impacts and its effects on labor and community. There's real optimism about what it might do for climate, what it might do for healthcare, what it might do for science. And that goes for the youth as well. They hold both of those at the same time.
Here's another question. What crazy Hollywood film idea became the inspiration for a California policy or product?
If anyone has that answer, I'm going to steal that idea because it's why we're here.
I mean, I always feel like the Cheech and Chong, films are important to what's happened to drug policy.
Would that be Reefer Madness, Joe?
Yeah, but also, Born in East LA is actually a great document. The Cheech from the I'm from the '80s. Sorry, a child of the '80s, and yeah, I mean that's. Our different approach to immigration, which came up in this conversation, reflects that. Cheech is a veteran, and he doesn't actually speak Spanish. He speaks German, and there's some conceit. He crosses the border in a different direction, but there is that sense of we're all in this, and that's reflected in sometimes what I've seen the LA Times call the sort of the California suite or the California citizenship we've created for unauthorized immigrants. I see a direct line to Born in East LA.
Here's another question. I'm curious to hear from panelists if they think California's higher ed system plays a role in its innovation. If so, what's the role? And with higher ed in funding and political crisis, what will emerge?
So I think definitely the higher ed in California has played a huge role in the ecosystem that has been built around innovation and entrepreneurship, and continues to be an example where other parts of the world, other cities are trying to replicate. I can comment on the political side of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will only say higher education we know is critical to advancement. Our surveys show at PPIC that a four-year degree is the single greatest protector of a person and their family in times of recession or depression financially. We also know that the boomer generation that is retiring out is the generation with the highest number of BA degrees of all the generations. So we're looking at a drain of the first time such a huge number of people who are educated are leaving the workforce. And so higher education continues to be critical. California has a wonderful master plan from 1960, a little bit outdated. California now has the blueprint, but we need to do more. We need to make it accessible. And once we get that kind of base education and foundation, the sky's the limit, truly, in terms of space travel, in terms of world diplomacy. I think that exposure provides that predicate foundation for those solutions.
Okay, we have our first in-person question. Say your name, please.
Yes, my name is Maxwell Stern. I'm an undergraduate at UC Berkeley. And my question for the panelists are, what are some trends in California, particularly in innovation, that you are looking towards and would share with us in the audience?
What I've seen on my side, of course, needless to say, AI and tech is always there, but I've seen a boom in climate tech as well. A lot of the teams who are competing, for example, in our carbon capture competition, or the team that won our previous carbon recycling competition was from UCLA. So I see a lot of innovation in climate tech and conservation tech here in California.
Joe, I can't let you pass without offering an answer on what you see in innovative democratic practices locally. I mean, this is the biggest pluralistic democracy in the country, obviously one of the biggest in the world. It's a profound experiment at a moment when there's democratic backsliding all over the place. Are we at the forefront? Do we have some exciting trends in localized practice, or?
I wish I could say yes wholeheartedly to that. I think we're laggards, but we're getting there. I mean, in summer 2022, the city of Petaluma did a novel thing that you're seeing in other parts of the world too, a citizens assembly where you select people by lottery you create a computer sortition. You can create a group of everyday people who are representative. There's gender parity, representative of Petaluma. Actually, in that case, they deliberately oversampled they actually, in a sort of an equity move, they tried to overrepresent people on the west side of the 101 in Petaluma, which is a more Latino part of Petaluma, a newer part, and not so well represented in the city council debates. So it was equity. I'm involved in a ton of conversations about doing more of that, to do things as big as rewrite the Los Angeles Charter or rewrite the state constitution. But it's slow going, and there I fear the law. Some of our older laws on public meetings and public records actually are outdated and get in the way of those kinds of new conversational tools and participatory democracy tools.
Well, there's always the NDA.
There you go.
We have another question in person here.
Another California idea.
Yeah, we don't know if it's a good one.
Hello, my name's Eric Gavin, and I just wanted to reference back to the comments on the optimism versus the apocalypse. And I was sad to hear that, actually, but very proud of the answer that Anousheh gave, especially where she talks about it's these ideas that can bring us forward and lift us up. And just to avoid a question that's actually a statement, I will actually ask a question. I believe that we can see ideas that produce and go places and ideas that lead, but can one of you or all of you or any of you talk to what I believe is the potential for ideas to inspire? We talked about young people being afraid and dropped out and disconnected because they're constantly being told the apocalypse. How can our ideas instead constantly tell them what they need to hear to inspire them?
It is truly a problem, and it is true that most young people are overwhelmed. And we try to say, okay, we have this really inspired optimism at XPRIZE. How can we translate that into schools and young people? So we created a program for schools, and what we teach is the methodology we use internally, which is when we see a problem, we try to break down the problem. So something big all of a sudden becomes these simpler, smaller problems that you can see how you can solve each one of them individually, and together then you solve the bigger problem. So this first principles thinking, the skills to actually analyze a problem and understand it and then look at it through the lens of the solution is something that I think is not taught as often anymore in schools. And this problem solving, I'm an engineer, so problem solving comes with the nature of any engineer. That's what you learn going to 4 years of schools. And I think those skill sets throughout life, whether it's a personal problem or a technical problem or any type of problem, just understanding how you take something that's big and break it down, and then you're not overwhelmed by it is important. And we've seen this now, we tried last year in few schools here in LA and Michigan and a few other places. And it was amazing how students responded, because all of a sudden they're like, this problem's been bothering me in my community, and through the skills I learned, I broke it down and I have now an approach, a solution. So I think it's important to change that narrative, because everything they hear on social media, in media, everywhere is like it is apocalyptic, and it is these problems are, unsurmountable, and we need to change that narrative and help them say, no, they are big, they're important, they're urgent, but we can work together, collaborate, break it down, and solve it together.
Tanya Moravietz. I think a lot of people feel alienated and unengaged from these conversations, and I'm speaking from kind of a public policy government perspective, and I'm curious around your ideas. Many ideas in innovation come from underengaged or underserved diverse communities, like people who have disabilities. And those populations may have tech issues or issues on broader reach. So how do we do a better job of engaging and harnessing those voices to be part of the solution? Because a lot of that innovation comes from what some might say are outsiders to the actual conversation.
First of all, I think the kids might be more all right than we think they are. And like every generation, they're definitely coming up from behind and are remarkable in a lot of ways. And I think we could return to a conversation about the ways in which everything from the IPCC to like practices in philosophy are actually enabling people to feel like they have roles and enabling choice so that they can be active in ways that don't feel traditional. And so I think that there are lots of instruments and ideas out there that are passing on that. But I work in global affairs for the most part. And even though most Californians think their lives are affected by global affairs and they are in favor of diplomacy and development, it is one of the more elite and closed networks and businesses that exist. It's expensive to get into. It often has high barriers for education level. And so I think that one of the real challenges that needs to be built out and great opportunities in California is the idea of a small d democratic global affairs agenda that serves the people of California and is then sustainable over long periods of time and provides a bedrock for American foreign policy. And so as an example of this, the Biden administration has had this thing called the Foreign Policy for the Middle Class. It emerged from the Carnegie Endowment out of a lot of research that was done in Ohio, Nebraska, and Colorado. And what people in those places thought U.S. foreign policy should be. I think there should be something similar for Californians that brings a lot of those voices into the practice of global affairs and then forms a bedrock for how our cities and state think about it, but also a sort of sustainable foundational approach for the U.S. more generally.
I want to add to that to say, in my experience, belonging is local, and it's sort of neighborhood and community-based, and there are barriers to that and distractions from allowing that to happen organically, that happened before the internet, before Netflix, before streaming, before all of these different distractions keep us into ourselves. And so I have been a strong proponent, and we still are at PPIC with civics education and engagement, starting in elementary school and high school and bringing together diverse groups of students on projects and bringing them together with adult volunteers in the community, in the schools, and having them do some something together, like clean up a park, clean up a river. It starts small, but that's where agency comes from, and that's where inspiration together comes from, and that's where that personal touch comes. And it comes, and also just getting to know each other and feeling like you're part of something outside of yourself. And we hope to build on that and grow it so that people begin to feel more connected in their schools and their communities. And we also hope to reach the parents and the relatives, bring them, have them become part of this. And we've seen some of this in the judiciary, where we started with K-12, and then during COVID, we brought in judges into classrooms by Zoom, and they spoke Spanish, and they spoke Mandarin to schools where they had those high populations of students. But really, I think the responsibility is on us as the adults to try to get young people and other people in the community involved. And it's you know, it's that old saying, if you want a democracy, you need to have started 300 years ago. We have to build it. And I think it's on us to build it, and it's on us to include people as part of that, and we all have a role to play in that. And I think the time is now, and I've said the time is now for 12 years. It's still the time is now, maybe more so, but I think we all in community, everyone in this room has a piece of that.
All right. I think we should. Did you want to say anything more? I think it is now time to close. I'm getting that signal. Thank you to our panelists, our guests for this wonderful conversation. Thank you to CalMatters for co-presenting this program. You can read and watch and listen to CalMatters as it grows. It's quite a remarkable organization. You'll be able to find a summary of this program on Zócalo's website in the coming days, as well as interviews with our panelists. Please subscribe to Zócalo's newsletter, podcasts, and social media for more great conversations. We now encourage our in-person audience to continue the conversation at our post-event reception with light bites and beverages. Essentially, you're supposed to turn right. It's this level. Go over there. There are drinks in a space that is being called the Public Square. Anyway, thank you again, and please join me again in thanking our guests.